Good evening and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm your host, Kevin Castley. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Tonight, I am going to be debating Grayson here, Warren Hardingston over on Twitter, on the issue of what's more important to prioritize, foreign policy or domestic policy. Now, this specific topic is something that has been kind of in the air throughout a lot of discussions, some of which have been featured on the Politicrats channel, for example, on some of the segments that I've been a part of, as well as Grayson here, as well as some of the more pertinent discussions over on Twitter have involved this, where there seems to be a divide in more right of center circles between those that tend to lean more towards understanding foreign policy as the center of focus versus domestic policy. And now I don't think that either of us here would say that you just completely discount one and focus entirely on the other, but it's a debate tonight over which one is ultimately more important. And so with that, we got Grayson here. So we'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and everything to the audience, and then we'll get into opening statements.
Yeah, I'm Grayson. I'm the sort of the resident paleocon of Superpower Broadcasting. You've probably seen me on a few Kevin's videos.
Yeah, no, it's I believe as far as the total amount of support and everything that we've got, you're really like the only like sort of more prominent paleocon that tends to support my work and everything. So and we appreciate having a diversity of opinion and everything. So. We did lose your audio, just a heads up there.
I wasn't speaking.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Is there anything else you really want me to say about myself?
I think that's it. I think we can get into opening statements. So you're the challenger, so you get to go first. And actually, Henry's just in the chat right now. If Henry wants to moderate this, I'll send him an invite, but I don't think we'll need a moderator. So
I'll just open up by saying that ultimately I think domestic policy is more important on foreign policy in general. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. Like, obviously, if you're a national security advisor or head of the foreign committee, then yeah, foreign policy is more important. But like, for most activities revolving around everyone's day-to-day life, domestic policy is ultimately going to be key. Like, pretty much if you're a governor, state legislator, or you run like a committee like this farming or small business committee, you're most likely going to be mostly domestic policy focused. And so, at least for most politicians, it would make sense to be domestic policy focused. And I think that domestic policy ultimately is the leading drive that caused America to be to its prosperity. And I think that ultimately, if you don't have a domestic policy, you don't have a foreign policy, because you can't really fight for a nation that doesn't actually understand what it is that nation is.
Okay. So is that sort of the extent of your opening remarks, or was there anything else there?
That's basically the extent.
Okay. Yeah, because you just like I should have mentioned you got 3 minutes if there's anything else you wanted to say. But we got Henry joining us tonight, so Henry can moderate this. Like I said, I don't really think we'll need much of a moderator, but Henry, if you're free, feel like moderating a debate. So.
Oh, sure.
Okay, wonderful. So Grayson just gave his opening statement, so I'll give mine. I don't think mine will go 3 minutes or anything. But yeah, just Henry's joining us right now. So before we get into it, to the audience out there viewing this tonight, as well as in the future, be sure to check out his channel over on YouTube. That's American Madhouse. And you can go and follow Grayson over on Twitter at HCountryBall. So for me to get into the opening statement here. So basically, the thing about the issue of foreign policy, and I make this point on this channel, and this is something that isn't brought up very often, which is the idea that and it's been clear throughout the ages that, well, obviously it's important to focus on matters within your own borders and everything, without having the means to defend your own interests and the means to ward off invaders and whatnot, or potential rivals before they even get to that point, then no matter what your vision is, no matter what your values are, no matter what your beliefs are, no matter what your economics are, no matter what any of your aesthetics are, none of that matters if you're just vulnerable and will be taken over. In other words, if you just ignore or downplay the importance of the rest of the world such that you allocate so much of your resources to domestic economics or whatnot, or even the culture war angle, then what's going to happen is that you're inevitably then going to divert material support away from the foreign battlegrounds. And what that ultimately lends itself to is the propagation and expansion of your enemies' interests, because they're obviously focused on expanding. We know that Russia's expansionist, and we know that Communist China's expansionist. And so if America goes from having this sort of status quo in which it's quasi-unipolar, I mean, China and Russia don't have anywhere near a similar amount of force yet, but they want it. If America, who has it, says we're fine with giving this up, then in my view, it's only a matter of time before the West eventually gets subsumed by those rivals that want it and are willing to fight for it and are willing to spend the money to get there. And I would say it really doesn't matter what your domestic politics are, liberal, conservative, whatever, if you become a colony of Communist China or a colony or client state of Russia, because then your politics are whatever a foreign capital dictates they will be. So that's all I've got to say. So
is no one has anything to go
oh well, I guess we could get into, well, we were just doing the opening statement, so I guess we could go to Grayson to kind of kick off the main substance of the debate.
Okay, well, I'll just, I guess, start off with the sort of the historical context, and what I believe is that simply there's been roughly few times an invading army has actually successfully attacked the United States proper. And of the two times that happened was in 1812 and in the 1860s. And the big one was the American Civil War, which was an internal conflict. And that was mostly due to the fact that America at the time was ignoring one of the biggest domestic issues for 60 years, and that would have been slavery. Now, obviously, America wasn't actually doing it because they were focusing on any interventions. There were very few interventions during the time. The issue with that would be is that, again, though, it still shows a lesson. You can't just ignore the domestic issues. We can't just ignore like the BLM or Antifa or the KKK and groups like that, because these are technically domestic terrorist groups, and these are the groups that are going after America. And I would say as of now, they're going after America proper, more efficient than foreign enemies. So you can argue that foreign enemies are backing them. It still doesn't change the fact that these are American citizens making the attacks and not the army of Russia. The armies of Iran and Russia do attack foreign troops in the sense that they've been attacking military bases, but they haven't actually attacked America proper. No foreign army has ever actually successfully made any attacks on America proper, with maybe the exception of 9/11 in America's 200 years.
Okay. Well, I think what we have to keep in mind there is that I'm not necessarily saying that even if America pulled, support for European bases, Middle Eastern bases, bases in Asia away, that in 5 years America is going to become a colony of Communist China or something. I think it's a much longer term process. I think once you give it up, it's a lot harder to get it back than it is to maintain the status quo that you have. But I do think that if you pull support away from your allies or your partners in order to focus more on, say, infrastructure or whatnot at home, then what's going to happen is that you'll slowly see the status quo that you used to have be eroded. And it won't mean China's going to invade America in 5 years, but it might mean that states like Djibouti and states such as the UAE and these sorts of states that were more either neutral or under American influence become openly pro-China, and it's Chinese bases there. It also means that in Europe, you'll see the battle lines go from, say, where they are right now in Ukraine and the Baltics and Georgia. You'll see them get pushed more and more. And soon Germany will be mostly, as they already are tending towards, becoming Russian in influence, towards where the point where you only really have the UK left. And then you'll eventually get to a point where you'll have lost so much ground where a lot of people will recognize that they're coming for you. And some people will wake up at that point and say, oh, wow, we lost a lot of the world that we used to have. Whereas other people will say, well, until they invade us, it's not an issue. The problem is, if you follow that through to its logical conclusion, Russia and China are going to control literally everything else. And then it's just America left. And at that point, if a war breaks out, America would lose. Whereas right now, if World War III broke out, America would win. They'd both be very deadly wars, but at least you would win right now. Whereas down the road, going a more isolationist route, and I'm not saying that you're arguing for isolationism or anything here. I would say you, Grayson, probably understand that the U.S. does need to maintain a presence in Asia and the Middle East, right?
Oh, yeah, I do understand the need to put soldiers in South Korea, put them in Germany, put them in places like Iraq. My point of the thing I would disagree with you on is that you seem to have totally neglect some infrastructure projects. And you could argue that what was I? I wasn't. Now, what I was going to say was that I would just say that when you can, if you have terrible infrastructure, though, your nation will already be less ready for war. Like, how are people in the Rust Belt who are living paycheck to paycheck who are unemployed right now, going to react when the government can do anything? Their only option would be to join the military. Oh, they likely aren't going to feel patriotic about this. Well, the morale would be low. So I would say the infrastructure is important, not only because it can obviously make transporting the war materials necessary, but also it will create jobs that will boost morale, because ultimately people who are happy in the country they live in will feel patriotic and will be willing to fight for it. Whereas people who are more poor and unhappy living here are going to not be as willing to fight for it. The morale would be a lot lower.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I'll say this. I don't even necessarily think that it needs to be a trade-off. Obviously, for the sake of the debate, we're talking about which one's technically more important. But I'd say this. I'd prefer to raise taxes but keep the spending on defense where it is. Like, I think that all NATO countries should be spending 8%. But I also think that, yeah, you do need to invest in infrastructure and everything. Like, I'm somebody who, even though I prefer lower taxes, we can have a lower tax system once the world is under American hegemony. In the meantime, like even Reagan spent 8%. Like, he raised taxes to fund the military. I think what would be better is keep things where they are now, or move them towards a more bolstered position, as well as invest in infrastructure. It would just mean kind of changing the political culture around taxation. I think the problem that we have, and this is an issue in Canada too, is that some people have this idea that, well, taxation is theft and taxes for anything is a problem and whatnot, when in reality, it depends what you're spending tax money on. But I will say, I agree with what you were saying about how if people feel that their government doesn't care about them and they feel like they were neglected or disenfranchised, it's a lot harder to then have any sort of patriotism and everything. I would say that a big aspect of what happened to the Rust Belt wasn't even necessarily about infrastructure spending. It was specifically about outsourcing and the lack of government initiative to get in the way and say, look, you guys can't like sell out the Rust Belt to China, you know, like, because I think a protectionist stance on economics coupled with an offensive realist stance on foreign policy is the best of both worlds, in my view, to keep people happy at home as well as secure abroad.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The issue with the whole foreign policy first initiative would be that it's just, we can argue for the sakes of optics, or that most people are definitely not foreign policy first. And it was kind of clear in 2016. You saw like the Rust Belt go red for the first time since the 80s. And Donald Trump went on the America First, while Hillary Clinton was more of these, I wouldn't actually know how to really define her, like neoliberal offensive realist. Would that be?
Yeah, I would say she was more of a neoliberal for sure, definitely on economics. I mean, somebody who's, you know, very out and out about free trade, reducing border regulations, that kind of stuff. As far as an offensive realist goes, I wouldn't even go so far as to say that she is, but in the American context, which is pretty anti-war these days, I can see why people would get that impression. She was just for things like a no-fly zone over in Syria. She was more of a humanitarian interventionist in that sense than a straight up offensive realist, from what I gather. Like, she's definitely not anywhere near as hawkish as somebody like John Bolton, for example. But yeah, I would say that her economic message was a huge loss, and that should be a message to anybody on the right to look at and say, it doesn't really matter which branch of right-wing politics you have. We need to get over this fetishization of free trade. That would be my sort of view of it. I think a lot of people misplace their animosity over what happened to their jobs and associated it with the defense establishment, when the corporate / neoliberal establishment and the defense contractors are two pretty different groups, and the military is pretty separate from Wall Street and whatnot. So but they kind of got tied up together, where now a lot of people are really angry that they lost their jobs and that they're not coming back and that it went to communist China. They're mad at the neoliberals. They're mad at the corporate establishment, and they tie the Pentagon and everything in with that as if they're the same. And it ultimately means that they misplace their animosity towards the national security wing, when their animosity should really be directed at, you know, the neoliberal sort of group. So, but that's my stance.
I would just say that in general, the issue with a lot of the neoconservative politicians these days is that they just don't have much of their domestic policy is a lot weaker. I would just say that in general, and I would say that could actually be a reason why you have an anti-war sentiment, not necessarily because the war's unpopular, just because the people who tend to make better domestic policy, at least on paper, all just happen to be your Donald Trumps, your Bernie Sanders. Like, I just think that's why Kyle Kozinski and all those other brainlets are getting so much attention. Their domestic policy is what's striking them in, and then they get indoctrinated into the anti-war sentiment, and then suddenly you get people like Ben Knowlton influencing large swathes of the American left.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. I want to kind of delve a bit deeper into that and see. So you talked about how there was this weaker domestic policy that's been purported by neocons, and I would say a lot of the older sort of neocons that are out there lately tend to really only talk about foreign policy issues, and they give domestic issues a pass. I mean, I can think of BLM as an example of this, where for me, I'm pretty critical of BLM, like people like Dylan Burns and stuff have called me a Nazi and everything because I regard the leadership there as basically terrorists and whatnot. And of course, you could check out American Madhouse, when I've gone on Henry's show and stuff and we cover the riots and everything. Everybody knows like I'm pretty anti-BLM, but a lot in the neocon sort of establishment, they just kind of, support it because it's not really an issue for them. So when you say weaker, do you mean that it's just not a focus, or do you mean that they do have domestic politics, but they're just bad? Like, what would you make of that?
I would say it's mostly the first, though the second one has sometimes shown, like during the 2008 recession. Generally, though, it's just a lot. Like, I get why some neocons don't focus on domestic policy, like John Bolton. He's a national security advisor. He's not really supposed to deal with domestic policy. So then that makes sense. But the issue I would have is when you have situations where governors who don't usually play much of a role in foreign policy are chirping in. That seems to be my issue, is when, especially, I mean, yeah, but it's mostly just because they ignore domestic policy. That's kind of the main reason I say that they're not winning that front.
I see. So I guess this would probably be a good point in the debate where we could kind of go over what our domestic focus would be. What would you say would be sort of a domestic policy platform that you'd like to see implemented? And then I can give my sort of rundown. I mean, we can talk both about the United States. I'll talk about Canada, what we would like to see. So.
Well, for the United States, I would like to see healthcare reform. That should be pretty big. But I wouldn't want to have it in the way that so many of the socialist left keep trying to propose. I want to have a more German-style system. Also, I think we should give more powers to the states when it comes to healthcare, as I believe that limiting, as the 50 states could probably run their healthcare systems better than one large national government. That's healthcare. Another issue, I think that a negative income tax should replace Social Security.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah,
agree on that one.
I think that there should be more of a infrastructure. There should be more works into public works and infrastructures. I also believe that we should find ways to increase tax revenue throughout most means, if that includes raising taxes on both state and national levels. I know that actually does, not to the extent that would hurt businesses, though. I support certain labor laws, increased labor laws, but not like unionization, but allow for like negotiated wages and I would also say that the other thing I would say is more border security and more and also education to reform, specifically to address racial issues, not in the sense of the 1619 Project, but in the sense that I think schools these days should teach that race shouldn't be a factor in day-to-day life, and that's a historical concept that no longer exists. That's sort of my run-of-the-mill takes on reforms in the U.S.
Okay. Yeah, I would say negative income tax is a big one. I think that you could do away with a lot of excessive and burdensome government bureaucracy by transitioning over towards the negative income tax. And you'd get rid of this whole sort of stigmatization and perpetual cycle of poverty that you have with a welfare system. You'd actually be more encouraging people to work. I think that one big thing that I'd like to see would be changing the focus in high schools away from what it is now, where everybody just kind of, they do the bare minimum and you got to get like a certain amount, like a C or whatever in English to pass and everything. I would make it so that if you want to even just get your high school diploma, you have to get at least 70% in 4 classes, like grade 9, 10, 11, 12, personal finance. because I think that personal finance is probably the most important thing that you can teach kids, at that age, not like the random stuff that they teach them and everything. I think that one big thing that we could do on domestic policy is definitely I'm for a lot of industry deregulations where they tend to be burdensome and everything, but I think that one set of regulations that I think has to come into play is going after the debt economy at large. I think that we've allowed the debt crisis to basically become a national security crisis, both in Canada and the United States. You can see this in terms of dependence on communist China, for example, and that's true in both countries. I think that, and this one's more something about Canada, I would say we need to pass a law, and this will probably become a problem in the US eventually. We need to pass a law basically barring people from buying up real estate with ill-gotten money, especially from communist China. Like anybody who's associated with the Communist Party, that kind of thing, they shouldn't be allowed to invest in realty markets like Vancouver or Toronto. That's something that I would say there, because they're just completely pricing out actual Canadians and whatnot. And it also becomes basically us playing host to what amounts to blood money. I would say one big thing just on the domestic level that I think would be, I think that would be important would be, and this would be for the United States, but it also tie in with Canada too, which is that we need to basically lower this stigma and burden that's imposed on the energy sector. I mean, I'm talking about things like carbon taxes, that kind of stuff. I want to get rid of those. I think that those, it's clear they punish the poorest people the most that have to commute and everything, or have to use trucks and whatnot for work. And I would also, the last thing that I'd say on that is that I would move the U.S. So like, if as far as healthcare goes, I think that what the U.S. would be best getting to is to keep a private system, but have it where you have like a more of a government subsidized level up, like in terms of individual citizens and everything. You can look at like the Georgian system and whatnot. The problem that you'd have with, like, say, the United Kingdom, for example, is that it tends to become pretty stagnant and inefficient. I think that the best solution when it comes to healthcare is trying to have the benefits from private competition, but accounting for the externalities that, well, if some people don't have health insurance, then that screws them over basically. But that's what I can think of there. But I think that something that we had talked about a little bit before was just talking about the culture war and everything. And I think that, like, I'll say this, I think that it is a bit of a problem when you do have a lot of the people that tend to be more hawkish on Twitter coming out and just, not really thinking about it, just embracing a narrative. Because I get it, if you didn't pay attention to the riots and you didn't pay attention to this kind of stuff and everything, and you just hear, oh, Black Lives Matter, that sounds good. Like, who's going to say, oh, are you saying Black Lives don't matter? It's like, oh, are you against Antifa? Are you a fascist? It's like, if you just look at it from a surface level, I can see why some people would give BLM a pass or whatever. And I think a lot of people that only really focus on foreign policy, I think, if they're not in the news, if it's not like their job or whatever, they don't spend a lot of time on it. They're focused more on like keeping up with, what's going on in the rest of the world. I can see how they would have a blind spot when it comes to things like that, because these are movements that might sound good, but then you actually look into them, what they do and the damage that they've caused and everything, and the false narratives that they spread. And you see that they're actually really destructive. So, but that'd be my response.
Do you have like any criticisms for me?
Well, I would say, I would say one sort of criticism though would be, it's not even so much a criticism, it's more of a question. Are you arguing that U.S. defense spending should be cut back from where it is currently? I think it's about 2.5% of GDP. at the moment? Do you think that it should be reduced to focus on other projects, or do you think that raising taxes is preferable? Because I would say raising taxes is preferable to cutting defense spending.
Well, it depends. But there definitely is waste in defense spending, so I guess you could say that you could cut back on waste, but I would generally not be against cutting defense spending. I would say use the negative income tax to go after the hot button issue in the economy, and that would be like Social Security, use healthcare reforms to go after Medicare, because some of these aggressive gremlins talk about the defense spending. They neglect the fact that Medicare and Social Security combined make up 50% of the budget. So I would not generally be in for cutting defense spending. Maybe not raising it right now, but when things become more stable, I would probably be. Granted, it shouldn't take too long to stabilize. It should probably happen in a few years. I mean, and at the rate we spend on defense, I don't think China and Russia are going to catch up anytime soon. Well, not anytime soon, but they're not going to catch up within a few years. I don't even think it's possible for Russia to catch up all defense spending at all.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think the real threat though is Russia and China combined though. Like the issue is if they gang up right now, they're about half of what the US spends. Down the road in 10 years, it's possible that they'd be equal, and then that becomes a problem. But what do you make though of the global presence? Like, would you argue for drawing down troop presence in certain areas or pulling back bases, that kind of thing?
Well, it depends. There is the old thing that you don't necessarily need. You could do the same thing without 5,000 as you can do with 20,000 troops, roughly. I mean, but I would say maybe draw back some troops just because, but not a lot, just a few. And also don't draw back any bases unless the bases serve absolutely no strategic purposes. I don't know what base that would be, though, as I don't actually know where the bases are located.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them. I can't think of any offhand that wouldn't be Henry. Henry, you know of any bases that you would say offer no strategic value, like offhand?
No, no, I can't. No major ones. I'm sure there's probably something out there that I'm unaware of, but it's difficult because any base that you're gonna imagine, like it could be located anywhere, and you could imagine some scenario where it would be useful. So like pretty much any, like we have a base in Greenland, right? It's an Air Force base, and you might think, well, what the fuck are we doing with that? It was really useful during the Cold War. And I would say it's still useful now. Some people might say it's antiquated because its large utility there was early warning defense against a Soviet strike.
Yeah.
Like I still think it has utility because of its location in the Arctic Circle. I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothing around it. It's in the Arctic Circle, but like it's almost halfway between Washington D.C. and the Soviet or the Russia. So, like, I don't know. I can't really think of any base you would bring up to me almost anywhere on the planet. Maybe somewhere in Antarctica. Maybe we have a base down there, but like even there, like those are more scientific things, I would think. But I had a question for Kevin actually, just to try and move the conversation forward. Is because from your opening statement, you were saying the domestic issues need to take a back seat. I'm paraphrasing, generalizing, in order to deal with these threats. But do you think it's kind of a chicken and egg type question? Because on the one hand, you can say, well, our domestic issues have to take the back seat so we can deal with these foreign policy things. But on the other hand, I would think that certain foreign or domestic issues, to a certain extent, if they become enough of a problem, we're not going to be able to be a superpower, to be able to effectively deal with our opposition if we have domestic problems, if we have domestic unrest, you know, to a ridiculous extent, we have to be domestically strong in order to effectively oppose our enemies in the world. So to me, it seems like a kind of a chicken and egg type question. Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. I would say in an ideal world, it's kind of like, what Machiavelli said, where he's like, is it better to be feared or loved? It's like, well, it's best to be both, but if you have to pick one, it's better to be feared. It's the same thing with foreign policy. It's like if you could pick domestic or foreign and you only had to pick one, then you'd say, well, the foreign policy is the most important, because if you get defeated there, then it doesn't matter what your domestic policy is, because you're a colony now of a different country. But
well, that's exactly what I'm saying, though, is how, if you're weak domestically, how could you possibly be strong around the world? If you're weak at home, if you're falling apart from the inside, you can't really effectively oppose your enemies. Like,
right,
you're collapsing on the inside. It's that was it, Abraham Lincoln, a house divided against itself, and it's many things that goes into this. But it's, if the country's weak domestically, it necessarily will be weak on a foreign policy level.
No, I get that. I guess I should just rephrase this a little bit. Even though obviously I'm really critical about BLM and Antifa and all that kind of stuff, I don't think that division and that chaos and that even terrorism that they perpetrate is anywhere near as big a threat to the West and to the U.S. specifically as Russia and China. Like,
right.
I think
I'm not even speaking about that necessarily. It could be economically. It could just be the people are poor. It could be, our ability to produce goods is suffering. It could be any number of things, not specifically BLM.
Yeah.
It's just, if the people are poor, they're suffering. And then there's other things about, because you've spoken before about what the country is matters a lot. If the United States internally changes into something terrible, if it becomes a communist state, I don't think you would support it. So that's where I would say, or I would think, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, where it's like you would want both, honestly, or they kind of rely on each other.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I just think that the core of the U.S. still, the core of, U.S. production and everything, not necessarily even production. I've got a lot of criticisms about that, but I think that the core of what the U.S. has right now is still mostly intact. Whereas I see the status quo on the world stage is like, if that's let go, the U.S. might never get that back. And a lot of people died to get to where that is. And I think that it runs the point of being dangerous, where you've got these enemy countries that really want to be in that position, and they're willing to fight for it, and they'll seize upon any weakness abroad, and then that gets to be a big problem. But I think the biggest issue domestically, though, for sure, would be the economic angle. And on that, I think that partly ties into foreign policy, though, which is that if you were to say, look, we're going to decouple from China because we're done with communists, I think that would inherently actually benefit the domestic level. Like if you said, oh, we're not going to allow you guys to trade with them anymore, to all these corporations, like, yeah, you had your fun with your sweatshops and stuff, but you got to bring this stuff back to the United States now. I think that would benefit both the foreign policy angle, even if it's just motivated by foreign policy interests. You're still helping the domestic economy then, because people are getting their jobs back. So,
oh yeah, well, I would actually agree with that, because obviously politics is a zero-sum game. You can obviously gain from both. Like, the two aren't exclusive. Like, the one thing I would say, if I had to bullet to the head, choose domestic or foreign, I would just say domestic, and my reasoning behind that would simply be, even if somehow the US and Canada are standing alone against all other nations, I don't see any scenario in which the Earth is able to defeat, a United Earth could actually defeat the US and Canada. I think that the American, like, if Russia has hegemony and China do still have hegemony over the world, that's bad. But they'll never get the U.S. That's the thing I believe. Like the U.S. is going to be a beacon of democracy for the next 1,000 years, and Russia and China would now have to embody all the civil resistance against them. I just don't see any scenario in which the U.S. will ever lose its freedom, except within. Like it would lose its freedom if some of these radicals who just got elected, like Cory Bush or Jamal Bowman or MTG, get into power. Yeah, that's going to destroy our freedoms. I just don't see a Chinese state destroying our freedom.
Well, I guess this is another area, though, where it kind of ties into the foreign policy angle, which is that I think that a lot of those radicals, though, are directly sponsored by, like Jimmy Dore, for example, gets money from Assad, and he's propped up by the Russians. They're propped up by mostly Russia and to a lesser extent China. It's like it's tough. Obviously, you have to focus on both. It's just the problem is, I would say that in that world, I think you've got a point there that even if Russia and China had the rest of the world, the U.S. would still have a ton of nuclear weapons and would still be a hedgehog and would still be really hard to take down. My view of it is that Russia and China would just foment insurrections within the United States and weaken the government from within at that point and couple it with an invasion. But I guess that there would be an argument for saying that the domestic angle is more important because it makes you invincible. But my problem with that, though, is that part of the thing that makes the United States great is that it's not just a country that just cares about itself, because the U.S., the quote unquote empire that people think of it, or the hegemony that the U.S. leads, it's best for human nature. It's best for human interests. So when U.S. interests are strong, human interests are promoted, and that's not true with Russia or China or really any of these other empires throughout the ages. And so I would say the closest one historically that came anywhere near to the U.S. was the United Kingdom. I think they were the most benevolent of the colonizers, and they were still pretty brutal, but they weren't anything like the French or the Belgians, for example. But I think that the United States, though, if the U.S. just said, yeah, we don't care about the rest of the world or anything anymore, and we're not going to focus on spreading democracy and everything, and we're just going to say we're only going to focus, say, for example, on protecting democracy here, I think that people would get a sense that democracy wasn't a universal good. And at that point, I would argue, once you've already said we're not going to fight for this anywhere else in the world, or it doesn't matter anywhere else in the world, at what point do people surrender to nihilism where they say, why does it even matter here then? Like, I guess that's my problem, is that that sort of thinking, even if it's true that the U.S. could hold off an invasion, and even in that dystopic world, I think that what the U.S. would look like then is just a country of total selfishness and insularity, that it wouldn't look anything like a country that you'd really want to live in, even if it was still better than Russia and China. I think that the U.S. would have lost its moral way by that point if the U.S. let the world fall to Russia and China. But, you know, I know we're just talking hypotheticals, but
yeah, like I personally don't even see China, and like U.S. could put in some minimal efforts, and I don't see China reaching hegemony. I mean, already without the U.S., independent of the U.S., there are Kenyans in Africa that have literally been beaten, and they're literally beating Chinese businessmen and destroying their businesses. That's even independent of the U.S. So the U.S. could even put in. I'm not saying, and the U.S. they should put way more in than just a minimal effort, but they could definitely do damage to China and not have to necessarily increase their budgets tenfold just to do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's not just all about military spending. It's about how smart you are about spending it. But I think that one thing that we could kind of look at, though, is a common ground here, I would say, is that I think that at the most extremes, those that are the most hawkish, and like I'm pretty hawkish and everything, but obviously I talk about other stuff, those that only talk about like foreign policy and everything, and those that only talk about domestic stuff, like the Nick Fuentes type people and everything, they both miss what's happening on the other angle of it. Like, and I would say, like, if you only focus on domestic policy, or if you only focus on foreign policy, then you're inevitably going to give a pass to certain things happening on the other side. So, like, Nick Fuentes claims, I mean, Nick Fuentes is probably a bad example because he's basically a communist, but like, we could look at people like Patrick Buchanan, who I do think does believe in America. But the thing with Patrick Buchanan, or like with Patrick Buchanan's view, is that he looked at this sort of stuff and said, well, you know, let's just ignore, or Ron Paul is another example. I think that Ron Paul personally does believe in liberty. I wouldn't say that Ron Paul is a communist, but he doesn't really care if communism spreads around the world because he's only focused on domestic stuff. I think that at that point, he's got a huge blind spot, which is that when anything happens in the world, he doesn't care about it. And likewise, there are people out there on Twitter and stuff that when anything happens in terms of the riots and they burn down towns from Minneapolis to Atlanta and whatnot, or, you know, innocent cops are getting doxxed and harassed and everything for just doing their jobs, they don't care about it because they just go along with whatever popular opinion is out of convenience because they're only focused on international stuff. I think in both cases, you have a big blind spot. I try to keep up with both, but I'm obviously still more focused on, you know, what's North Korea up to, what's Iran up to, that kind of thing. But
yeah, I would agree with that. Just the one thing I would push back is that I can kind of see why a state legislator wouldn't focus on foreign policy because their job literally has nothing to do with foreign policy. That's like, I'm just use this out of example. I'll just use my state legislator. If Terry Austin came out and said, wrote like a big piece about why we need to invade Iran, well, that's good. That's his opinion, but it's ultimately not useful because he doesn't have any position to do so. So that's why I would just push back a little, is that state legislators should definitely focus on domestic policy as much as they can. And representatives who are in a position like chairman of the Small Business Committee, those people should definitely focus on the domestic policy, almost not exclusively, but a lot more.
Oh yeah, no, I would actually agree with you there. Like that's their little job. That'd be like talking about John Bolton and saying, like, grilling him on his opinions on BLM and stuff. It's like, yeah, that's not really his focus. You know, and I'm sure he's probably got a similar view of me on that, but it's not really something that he's tasked with responding to. What I'm more thinking of here is like the executive level, you know, the people that are in charge of policy at the grand level of things. What should they be focused on? You know, like the Biden administration, should they be looking at, you know, spending most of their time focused on the domestic angle, or should they spend most of their time focused on foreign policy? Or should they spend a mix of the two, half and half or whatnot? I think that Iran getting very close to nuclear weapons is probably the biggest issue immediately right now, even though North Korea's like, I mean, that's unacceptable. And we all know what they're going to do. They're going to try to blackmail the U.S. into letting them take the South unilaterally without any resistance. I think that this is the sort of thing that, you know, people, I get that in this state with the pandemic and everything, a lot of people are totally focused on their personal lives, and it makes a lot of sense. But we got to keep in mind that Iran's about to get nukes, and communist China is to blame for the pandemic, and there has to be a response to that, you know. But
yeah, that's the thing. It just certainly gets harder and harder because there are many issues on both levels. I mean, all I would say is I wouldn't really want to be an executive figure anyway. That's not like a job I want to do.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I mean, you could say the same. You could say something about, like, in terms of my content and everything, that I'd be more, you know, focused on foreign policy stuff, international relations and everything. That's just more of an interest of mine. I do think, though, that at the end of the day, these ascendant nuclear wannabes or nuclear terrorists in the case of like North Korea, for example, there's still a huge issue. And I think one of the reasons why with them it's more important than anything on the domestic level right now is that there's a window of opportunity with them that if you wait too long, they're going to be where Russia is. And then how are you going to stop them once they have thousands of nukes? Like, you have a limited window before they get a few hundred to a few thousand nukes where it's impossible to do an intervention anymore against them. You know, like, especially if North Korea gets H bombs and that kind of stuff. Like, how do you stop them then? Like, right now, it'd basically be like World War II against Japan if Japan had a couple nukes to fire back with. But if they get like 10 megaton bombs and everything, then at that point, it's like, what do? You know, you could still do a war with them, but at that point, you're already in the endgame scenario, and they know that nobody's going to be willing to pay that price. It wouldn't make sense at that point. And then you're saying, okay, well, now they can blackmail the world forever and nobody can do anything about it. So there are windows of opportunity there. And I get that there are windows of opportunity at the domestic level because people like Vosh and stuff would say, well, if you don't do anything or you don't focus that much on the domestic level, then you have a revolution. I just think that the U.S. is still really far off from a civil war, despite what like Tim Pool would say and whatnot. But I'm not going to say like, oh, BLM isn't a problem or anything. I think it's a big problem. I just think that North Korea is way, way more dire.
Right. I guess another question might be for Kevin on the domestic stuff. If you're talking about we need to have these positions, we need to have this administration that will push back on those, on, you know, policies that affect North Korea and Iran and those places, it would seem like you need to change the populace in their mind a bit. And that's going to come down to domestic issues like education, things like that, and like what we're teaching kids in school and, you know, things like that. And those are all domestic issues. So when you're talking about changing, you know, how we regulate the media, like what people are allowed to hear and say and things like that. And like, if you're talking about installing an administration that's going to take a hard stance on that, the only way you could do that, in my view, is, you know, through domestic policy, changing people's minds. And it seems like they're intertwined. They're like it doesn't seem like, I don't know, to me that they're that separable, really.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I mean, one thing that I liked about Trump was that as he was doing the trade war with China and everything, which I've given him credit for, I don't think he went far enough, but he did more than obviously Hillary Clinton would have done. I think one thing that he said that I liked was he said, you know, well, if universities are going to keep teaching like anti-American type stuff, but they're getting U.S. taxpayers to do it, and these profs are clearly getting paid by the U.S. government to do that, that we should look into that. And he never really got around to doing anything about it, but he had the right idea. I think that academia is a big source of this sentiment of like Michael Moore type rhetoric, Kyle Kulinski stuff, you know, oh, maybe we're the bad guys, that sort of thing. That comes out of like universities and everything. So that's a good point there. And I think, you know, because Grayson had messaged me and said, you know, well, do you want to do a debate on, you know, prioritization of foreign policy over domestic policy? And I'm like, sure, it could be interesting. But I don't like, neither of us would say that only one matters, right? So, you know, it's a sort of thing that, again, I just feel that once you add them all up, I feel like the international stuff that's happening right now is so important that I would say that, you know, for U.S. president, that needs to be the bulk of their focus. But I definitely agree with what Grayson was saying that, you know, for say Congress and everything, well, they should be focused on economics and stuff. So,
right. And I would assume you would think it depends on the, well, because Congress people have different positions. They can be immensely effective or influential in foreign policy. If you're thinking about something like Charlie Wilson, you could like possibly
Yeah.
credit with the destruction of the Soviet Union,
That's
because
true.
they control the budget, so they can put money into, you know, a certain operations that like if it's a congressperson on a committee about education, obviously that's their focus. But we have congresspeople on, you know, panels or councils. What do they call them? Is it
Oh,
councils?
committees.
Committees, yes, on you know, security and things like that. And so it depends on the congressperson, I would think.
Yeah. No. That's a good point. That's a good point. The thing is, I just want to be clear here. I'm not arguing that, you know, this stuff isn't important or that it shouldn't be focused on. I've said before, and before this debate too, I think that one blind spot that some people have that are, you know, mostly foreign policy focused and everything on Twitter is that they'll give a pass to these movements in the United States and throughout the West that, you know, they sound good, you know, oh, they got a good branding or whatever, but then you look into what they actually espouse and what they've done, and it's bad. I think that if you only focus on foreign policy stuff and everything, then eventually, yeah, it means that you're going to not look very critically at things like BLM or Antifa, you know, or the Proud Boys, that sort of stuff. But
Yeah, well, I would just say that I just think the domestic policy is better, because if that fails, you'll lose the entire nation a lot faster than any Russian. Like, I'm just gonna say this: the average American could do more damage to America than the average Russian ever could dream of. Like, it's kind of like how there was the saying of Russia: it takes a Caucasian to defeat a Caucasian. I think it's true for America. It takes an American to defeat America. Like, look, if a Chinese army were to land in like Los Angeles, say tomorrow, they would be severely beaten back all the way to Beijing. If a resistance group, say like some sort of like communist uprising in San Francisco happens, they can't be forced back. You'd have to fight. They can't be pushed back. That has to be what's the word? That would have to be. I can't think of the word.
oh, it would have to basically be like rooted out in the cultural level, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Like that it would be indicative of a broader problem, whereas the other one, there's a simple solution to it. You just kick them out. Like I see what you're saying in that sense. I think I'll go back to what I said before, though, which is that if you do kind of abandon the world and you take your focus away from that, you'll never get it back. So even if you're right that America could hold off China and Russia if they had the world and invaded, again, it would depend on how they went about that strategy. If they just outright did a war and stuff, I think the U.S. could probably hold off. But I think, though, even in that world, I think, Grayson, you'd probably might agree with me here, though, which would be that it would be way more difficult for the U.S. to get back to where the U.S. is today, having Europe and part of Eastern Asia and part of the Middle East as a sphere of influence than it is to maintain it today, right? Like, you'd have to fight a lot of ground to get back to the status quo of today if Russia and China had controlled the rest of the world right now.
Oh yeah, that would definitely be a tough battle. I mean, America could win that, but it'd be easier not to have that happen in the first place. It'd be like, what would have been easier, defeating the Nazis in 1936 or having to liberate France?
Well, I think there is a bit of a difference there, though, which is that if they did have the rest of the world, their armies would be stronger. They'd have a lot more scientists and stuff. And depending on how many people they were able to capture before they fled to the United States, they'd have a lot of German scientists and stuff. So they would have it wouldn't be like right now where the U.S. is like 3 times the military power of them. They would have more military forces by that point. They'd probably have more nukes. They'd have a bigger economy and everything. But the U.S. would have a way higher per capita economy because the U.S. would still be the center of freedom and innovation and stuff. But
I mean, again though, also they'd probably have more rebellions and.
Well, that's true.
That's the thing. I also think that this is sort of an interesting take. I think we should also, when we talk about foreign policy and domestic policy, there are obviously those who want a little foreign policy and their domestic policy, like pipelines to make sure Russia can't produce much at a high cost.
Yeah, that's like me, Like,
I would also say though that we need a little domestic policy in our foreign policy. So when we're like saying like Iraq 2006, we implement some of the reforms we would have implemented in the United States, like infrastructure, like we did that, but more economic reforms. And I mean, convince the parliament, hey, these reforms worked good in, say, Michigan, as they'll probably work very well in Mosul.
Okay. What would be a bit like a couple examples of that though? You're talking like infrastructure spending and everything, right?
Yes, I can't think of a few. I can't think of any major ones off the top of my head, but like, I guess you could say education reform teach people that, just de-radicalization, like in Nazi Germany. I mean, we do that to the extent, but I don't think we do it as well as we should.
No, I think that's interesting, but I would push back a little and say, at least with neocons specifically, with neoconservatives, there is that emphasis of the domestic in the foreign policy, which is that, at its core, neoconservatives want to turn every country into a democracy like the United States. So there is that like exporting your system. But I think you're talking more like specific policies, not just ideology, right?
Yes. Also, I mean, technically, that's not every hawk, I believe. I believe John Bolton isn't really as much as democracy as he is national security. But
he's not a neocon,
that was beside the point anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I just mean like with neocons specifically. Obviously, John Bolton has said before he doesn't think it's a priority. He doesn't see the U.S. as like should try to take the world and make it a democracy. He's just solely concerned about national security, and he thinks the best way to get that is by having a good offense and having things be done on your terms over there than on their terms over here. That's like his reasoning. Whereas with somebody like Irving Kristol or son Bill Kristol, it's about or people like David Frum in the more neocon side of things, it's about exporting your system of government to the rest of the world because you think it's the best. So, but I think that there is an argument that could be made like, oh, well, you're spending money on infrastructure in Iraq, but you're not spending money on infrastructure here. Critics of that angle would say, well, yeah, but Iraq was a war zone, so you have to invest in getting them up to a basic level, whereas the U.S., even parts of the U.S. that aren't that great are still way better than where Iraq was in 2006. That would be the counter argument. But I definitely see the argument, though, that people would say, well, yeah, but this is also this country in that sense. And I think that a compromise, though, that I'd say, at least that I'd be willing to go for is like, in general, I support lower taxes, but I'm totally for raising taxes to fund infrastructure projects. But would you agree on that? Like keep all else spending, like just assume all else spending is equal. Would you be for raising taxes to fund infrastructure, assuming you couldn't cut anything?
Well, I mean, if we want to avoid deficit spending, we're raising taxes either way because we already have $1 trillion deficits. But yeah, definitely probably should raise taxes if you can't cut anything. Because you know how Democrats are. You can't cut any of the programs that were by Democrats in the last 70 years.
I know. It's unfortunate. Like in reality, like we said, we both support negative income tax. That would save a lot of money in the long run, and you could obviously use some of that savings to fund infrastructure projects. But just say you're a Republican and you got a Democratic House and everything. What are you going to do? You would have to basically say your choice is either raise taxes or don't do it. I mean, I guess it's a bit of a hot take. I would say raise taxes. I think that infrastructure is still important, but
Well, actually, that what happened exactly in 1992. Bush had to negotiate with the House, and so had to raise taxes, and then that became the big controversy.
Yeah, I mean, you never get 100% on what you want, though. That's the thing. I mean, sometimes you can. It really depends on your will. Like, let's say that you had the House, you had the Senate, and you had the White House, and you were somebody like, I don't know, say somebody like a Mitch McConnell type figure. You could get a lot done. But then you could compare that to Obama. Obama had the House, the Senate, and the White House for a little while. And he didn't really get that much done because he was worried what Republicans would think of him. And so Democrats are really strong at holding what they have, but they're really weak at really getting new stuff done, I find, generally speaking. Whereas Republicans are more, they tend to be more fighters in general, and they don't really want to lose any ground at all, but they also want to gain a lot of ground. I think that that's an advantage that Republicans have in general, but most of the time, though, you always have to have like a House or a Senate that's on the other side, and then things get really slow, move along.
I think that just comes down to the history of the Republican Party in general, because between the years of like 1930 and 1994, there were only 2 times Republicans ever held the House or Senate, and so they obviously have that.
Like when you've got the opportunity, you take it, right?
Yeah. That's why I think, personally, I think in 2022 we'll probably see the House go for the Republicans, and I'm pretty confident in that. The Senate could be a little more competitive, but some of the people who are up for re-election are good targets, like Raphael Warnock. I mean, I want to get him out as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, Warnock.
About that.
Yeah, Warnock's pretty despicable. Yeah. I don't really have much else to add here, but Henry, if you got any other sort of topics or lines of questioning, feel free to get to those, I guess.
No, not really. It seems like I don't know. You guys have kind of come to a point of agreement. It kind of seems like.
Yeah, let's just raise taxes.
Yeah.
Yes, libertarians are seizing right now.
No. Again, I just want to be clear about something. In an ideal world, when Russia and China are both democracies that are Western allies, you can lower taxes all you want once you don't have massive military threats. But right now, like if you have to keep the defense spending, which you have to, otherwise you don't have a country, and you have to keep all this excessive government spending because the Democrats have the House and everything, then at best what you could do is raise taxes to do more stuff.
An ideal world is in 1,000 years where every country on earth is now part of one United Nation. We can just get rid of the government altogether.
Well, not in United Nations, United States. Like if the world was the U.S., I think that'd be based. If the world was the UN, there would just be giant civil wars every few years.
If the world was a UN, nothing would get done.
Nothing would get done. Like, can you imagine? There would be no infrastructure anywhere in the world. Because
no, we'll get to that eventually. We have a 20-year plan for 3 buildings.
Yeah, we got like 8 committees, and one of the parties in one of the standing committees just vetoed something. So, oh man,
the UN is a massive. It makes the League of Nations look competent.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of funny how, okay, I'll say this before we go off air. I guess we'll go to the closing remarks and stuff, but I guess this is going to be kind of a meme now, how we have a paleocon come on and argue to focus more on domestic policy. We have a neocon come on and focus more on, foreign affairs, and the agreement we reach is to raise taxes, that's going to trigger a lot of people. So, like, I can think of some neoliberals and stuff right now, as well as some libertarians that are just absolutely seething at the thought of that. Just like, this is proof that paleocons are actually super left-wing communists and stuff. And it's like simmer down. Like, Nick Fuentes is a communist, but he's also not even really a conservative. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he literally said, he's like, give me full communism, man. Over he was disappointed with Trump on some of the inaction on the border or whatever. Not to mention anti-Semitism, all that other kind of stuff. Whereas generally speaking, U.S. conservatives tended to be stronger allies of Israel. But yeah, no, raise taxes. That's the meme. So I'll be sure to like clip out that portion of it and definitely post it in some libertarian groups just to trigger them. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
And don't even put the context that we only want to do it temporarily. No, let's just say we want 100% taxation rate for 1,000 years.
Oh yeah, like AOC. Yeah, AOC thinks she's based or whatever at 94% taxes. It's like, oh yeah, 100%. And
yeah, like no one. It's not like people didn't pay like only 48% back then because there were so many tax loopholes.
No, it's like, I mean, I'm thinking of that meme right now of the world, like the future if the tax rate was 100% for 1,000 years, and it's just like flying cars and stuff. Oh man, no, this is pretty potent. I think a lot of people that see this out of context, well, actually, even some people that see this in context will be like, "See, I knew it. They just want to, like, they're taxation thieves,
There's no such a taxation thief. I literally go into people's homes and steal their tax reports.
Oh man, yeah. So I guess we should go to closing remarks. So I'll go first, so that you could go last on that, because that's how we always do it. So basically, I think I made a case here that you obviously have to focus on both, but that right now, given the way that the world is and everything, I think that the foreign threats are greater than the domestic threats as they stand currently. I also think that if you focus on the domestic policy so much that you wind up losing ground on the foreign stage, that ground that's lost might never be recovered, and that so many millions of people have died for that status quo that you got to at least maintain that. And so that's why I come to the idea that, well, if we can't cut both or whatever, well, then you got to raise taxes essentially. But of course, I also argue for a negative income tax, and so did Grayson here too, as a means of making government spending more efficient, less burdensome, that kind of thing. But just in a world where we have to keep things as they are, or cut things, better to raise taxes to improve domestic angle than to neglect the defense spending. That would be my view. And so I think that tonight's debate has been pretty cordial. I think it's almost more of a discussion than kind of a debate, as people would usually expect as a debate. I know Kansik in the chat was saying earlier, like, boo, there's no fighting, but that's all that I've got to say. So hopefully it was fun for you guys to watch and everything. And thanks for Henry for moderating it. So we'll go to Grayson then for closing.
All right. I guess I have to give the people what they want. Kevin, your ears are like elephants. I can't believe. How come you can't fly yet?
I'm just imagining right now. I saw a drawing by Ben Garrison today of Joe Biden being like Groundhog Day Joe Biden, where he's got these different shadows, and it was different stuff, just like socialism and like do nothing Dems or whatever, that kind of stuff. And it's just like each shadow of him was like something else that's bad, or like gun control and that kind of stuff. But then it said on the hole in the ground that he rose up from, it said Biden. And I was like, yeah, we all know that's Biden. Why does his name tag have to be there? But he's Ben Garrison. He labels everything. But he didn't label his ears. And I was thinking, like, if he ever does a comic of me, I hope he labels like left ear and right ear, you know? Like, because he always does the labels, just like, you know, yeah, like, because that's what the Nick Fuentes people would always be like, oh, look at his ears, you know. But anyway, yeah, that's me interrupting there. I'll let you make your closing statement. So,
but in actuality, I'll say that I think in this debate, I think it was a pretty good debate. I think I did defend my points very well, and I think I proved you can debate Kevin without being totally nuked.
oh no, for sure. I would say, you know, this is probably the closest debate I've ever done. I'm not going to say that I lost this or anything. I think you did a really good job at defending your points. And I think you did a lot better than the last guy I debated, who doesn't even have a Twitter account anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm certain I'm still going to see you on Twitter in a couple days. So you already did better. So,
yeah, at least I can go sleep comfortably knowing I definitely was the best opponent you've had so far, according to you.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there were other really cordial guests. I mean, we've debated in the past before. I think you did better this time than the last one. The last one was pretty close too, but Uncle Thomas was really polite and everything. I still think I obviously won that debate. This one, I mean, we'll let the people decide on that and everything. But I'll say this: if there was ever a debate that I've lost on YouTube, it would be this one. But I don't really think I lost. But I can see why your arguments are probably more popular.
I warned you that
that's the easy way we could decide. Just press 1 in the chat if Grayson won the debate. 2 if Kevin won.
I like that framing. It's like it's already implicit in that. It's like, oh, no, 1 is for Grayson, 2. Like that would never be scientific.
Oh, Kenzik already said I won.
We got 1.
Yeah, we got Kenzik saying 1. Come on, where am I?
First debate, Kevin's lost according to the shadow jury.
No, we need the shadow jury. Where's? Oh man, no. Funny story about that actually. Apparently, I heard that the last guy that I debated spent like 2 hours trying to convince the shadow jury that he won. So they didn't overturn the results of the election though. So. 1, 2.
That sounds rigged to me.
Yeah, no, totally rigged, man.
I guess I can have a great.
We got Pest. Come on, where's Pest? Come on, Pest. Do me a solid, dude.
Kevin's like, I won in a landslide. I don't care what the people say.
We got Arthur saying 1.
Yeah,
no, this might be the first debate I ever lost in like a year of YouTube debates and stuff.
I told you.
You gotta demand a recount, Kevin. Go and take it the legal route.
Yeah, no, we'll take this to the Supreme Court.
Go to Georgia.
No, we'll take this to the Supreme Court, dude.
I warned you, Kevin. I said this might be the first debate you will lose, and the people have spoken. Grayson takes a slight W.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll say this. I'd rather lose to somebody in my community that I'm generally amicable and everything towards than to say like a Nazbol or something like that. Like I'd rather lose to somebody who's in the community than somebody outside. So, you know, I'll say that. So, I mean, it would have been embarrassing if I lost to Uncle Thomas or something. So,
well, technically I'm a paleocon, so maybe you might see those videos like Kevin Castley gets epically destroyed by Chad Paleocon.
Yeah. No, you're the most hawkish paleocon I've ever talked to. So
I don't even know if I'm actually a paleocon or if I'm just lopping as one, but
yeah, what would make you a paleocon, Grayson? Or are you like super religious or something like that?
Oh, I mean, I'm not even that super religious. I just think I'm more socially conservative than most people would think. But And I just like Pat Buchanan's domestic policy, so I guess I'm pale. I mean, I don't know.
Well,
Yeah, no, I
yeah.
mentioned Pat Buchanan earlier because I was originally going to talk about Nick Fuentes, and I'm like, nah, but he actually hates America. I think Pat Buchanan does love America. I just think that his focus on the domestic stuff clouds his ability to take into consideration any foreign policy considerations, really. And I find that with like Ron Paul too. Like I don't think that Ron Paul hates the United States. I just think that if all you care about is the domestic angle, then you're doing your country a disservice because you're going to lose ground on the world stage. That's just my view of it. But
I feel like the two could actually be hawk-tailed if they weren't so old and so stubborn.
Is it just is the PaleoCon thing? Is it mainly just that you're less focused on like, I guess, economic conservatism? You don't care as much about that. You're more concerned about social conservatism.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think it's just because I'm like socially right wing and then like economically center more.
You would be, I guess, opposed to gay marriage and abortion and things like that.
Well, gay marriage, I'm not necessarily opposed to gay marriage, but I am opposed to, say, abortions in most cases.
Right.
Arthur changed his vote. He says social conservative. I changed my vote. I consider myself a social moderate. So like I support gay marriage and I support legalized abortions, but they like you should have access to them, but we should try to have them be as limited as possible. Like I support like, birth control, that kind of stuff, but and like obviously like education, schools and whatnot. I know that the states that have like the highest teen pregnancy tend to have the lowest focus on sex ed, that kind of thing. So let's see.
Oh, now everyone's
vote for Kevin, but it was a relaxed debate. Well, I don't know. Like there are conservatives that watch the show and everything. I wouldn't even like. I'm somewhere in between because like some of my policies would definitely be conservative on social stuff. Like for example, the furthest I'll go on drugs is marijuana. Anything past that, like, nah, I think that's doing a disservice to the country. But
you don't want to legalize crack?
No, I don't want to legalize. I guess that's a hot take. I've seen the consequences of it in my personal life way too much that, like, marijuana is a meme, and those that really fetishize it can be annoying. But crack is something else. So
yeah. No, here's the thing. I'll just say this: legalize marijuana, but if you send for it, you get sent to the gulag. That's mine.
Oh man!
You don't think it cures cancer? I'm
gonna call bullshit on
what's the other?
Because I've had cancer in real life, and marijuana doesn't do shit against it.
Yeah, no.
Oh man!
It makes you accept your terminal fate, I suppose.
Apparently, it actually can make you suicidal, and if under the right circumstances. Yeah, I mean, technically, it does. I guess it kills cancer in the sense that you don't have to deal with it anymore. But
I think one of the things about marijuana too, like for example, I used to smoke weed when I was in high school and stuff. For example, I stopped smoking it. Like it never really did anything for me, like psychedelically. I just do it like as a social thing. But I stopped when I found out that there's at least in research that's been done in Canada, a 3% chance higher rate of developing schizophrenia if you're predisposed to schizophrenia if you smoke weed. And I'd actually met somebody in my college, for example, somebody that gave a talk who developed schizophrenia very shortly after smoking marijuana. And the thing is, I'm personally, like in my family, predisposed to schizophrenia, like my dad had schizophrenia, for example. So I was like, yeah, you know what, 3%, I'm not going to take that risk. It's not worth it or whatever. I do think it should be legal, but I think that there should be a lot more education around it I think, because a lot of people have it in their head that like, oh, it's harmless or whatever. It's like, it's not harmless. It depends. It can be harmless, but it depends. Even advocates for marijuana and everything that I've spoken to, they're all like, oh yeah, it increases my anxiety though. So it's like, I wouldn't say it's harmless, but
That's what most
I've read that it has more carcinogens than cigarettes. It just happens that, you know, a lot of people don't. Well, there's certain people that don't even smoke it. They eat it or vape it or whatever. But like if you're smoking it, I've read that it actually is more carcinogenic than tobacco. But it's, you know, people don't smoke weed the same way they smoke cigarettes. So
yeah, Kanzik says THC is beneficial to alleviate pain for people going through chemotherapy, etc. Has zero benefits otherwise. Yeah, some people would say that it calms them and whatnot, but
it's mainly recreational. Like people do it the same. Most people that are smoking weed are doing it for the same reason they drink. It's because it makes them feel good. It's euphoric. It's fun. Like and I'm not saying there's no medicinal uses. There's doctors that say that there are, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's also risks associated. And by the way, I'm not saying that it should be illegal or anything. I just think that people should be aware of those risks.
Oh yeah, that was always my thing. Is that I viewed it as, you know, in my view, the people I've known that use it heavily, usually it's been less harmful to them than people I know that drink heavily.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's comparative. Like, you know, alcohol is totally legal. Lots of people have it, drink it. So I view weed a lot the same way, but
opioids are technically legal too, and yet
we've got things like cigarettes and like all kinds of stuff that's legal, you know.
Well, that's one thing. People often use that as an argument against conservatives to call them out on hypocrisy. They'll say things like, well, conservatives will talk about weed, but then look at them, you know, with alcohol and stuff. And it's like, at least in my life, people that I know that consider themselves conservatives aren't apologists for like alcoholism.
I've known conservatives that want alcohol to be illegal.
Yeah, like it's kind of mean, but I see it on the Young Turks where they're like, oh, look at these conservatives talking about how, like, you know, crack should be illegal still and all this kind of stuff, yet they support alcohol. It's like, no, they're not for making alcohol illegal. But if you talk to average conservative, they're not saying, oh, alcoholism is awesome and you should get addicted to alcohol. They're like, no, you should drink in moderation. Like,
well, you see, it's easier to ban something that isn't widely used in public. Like crack is only used by a few percentage of people, so that can be easily banned. But alcohol,
alcohol is a cultural.
Yeah,
there's a difference there where it's been consumed by basically everyone, at least in American society, like forever. Versus weed, which is kind of newer. It is becoming that way. I've noticed, at least among young people, where a lot of them smoke pot. So,
yeah, Kanzik says here, CBD is still hard to access for many Canadians. I desire it because I'm at the left. Yeah,
CBD is like totally legal now in America. Like I live in one of the most conservative states, and you can straight up buy CBD, any kind of form of it you want, at a gas station. Like you can go in and get it. Not THC, which is the part that gets you high.
Yeah.
But,
Kanzik says, where are the weed advocates now that THC is widely legal and accessible? They're out smoking weed. They don't care about us. They just use us as a prop to legalize their shit. Like, yeah, you'll see, like with the whole movement, at least in Canada, the way that it was basically advertised, by and large, was the aesthetics of weed and the recreational aspect. To a lesser extent, it was the argument about the medicinal use. So,
yeah. Are you from BC?
Yeah, BC. Yeah,
and, you know, BC bud is like huge. It's like a huge thing.
Yeah, it's a huge thing.
It's like a name brand weed, man.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, no, I've had that before where people are like, oh, you're from BC. Do you smoke weed? It's like the first question, you know?
It's like a big import into the States. It's BC bud.
BC bud, that's right.
That's why I like being That's why I like being Virginian. There's literally no stereotype with Virginians.
West Virginians.
With West Virginia, there are stereotypes. Like Corona's had some stereotypes about coal miners and stuff. But
I'm literally like 15 miles away from West Virginia too, so it's like.
Oh man, yeah. Yeah, no, a lot of the stereotypes about BC, though, I mean, BC stereotypes are either like rich, like foreign investors in Vancouver and their kids going to school, high school, in like $10 million cars and whatnot. And yeah, there are stories about that where like they won't even have their actual driver's license and they'll crash like $100,000 car, that kind of thing. And then the other stereotype is like the BC bud thing. And then the other stereotype which goes into that is like the hippie thing. So
yeah, we've got a million stereotypes in Texas. Like I'm not even supposed to have the accent I have. Apparently, I'm supposed to have a Texas accent.
Yeah, your accent doesn't sound very
exactly. I'm supposed to ride a horse, everywhere I go, and have my 6-shooter and
carry a revolver. You gotta basically look like Wyoming Weiss's profile picture, like have like look like a cowboy basically.
And I'm Hungarian, so I must be like very sarcastic and hate life, and yell at people for no reason.
Oh man,
I wouldn't even know Hungarian stereotypes, honestly.
Well, here's the thing: you can look them up. And I'll probably guarantee you, like 90% of them are probably true.
Well, that's true of most stereotypes, I would say. They don't come from nowhere. They don't come from nowhere.
Like it can't be a stereotype if it has no relation to the real world.
Well, that's the thing with like Texas stereotypes. Like, I do know people that ride horses like through the middle of town, and like they carry their guns all over the place. They have the accent. They wear the cowboy hats. Yeah, it's
cowboy hats. That's right. Drive like an F-150 or an F-350.
I drive an F-150.
No, that's cool. Like I like trucks. I used to have a Ford Ranger. I really like trucks. Actually, a lot of people here totally shit on trucks, and it's like I like trucks. Trucks are cool.
See, that just makes me sad because the first car I literally knew was my grandfather's Trebon. I don't know if you know what a Trebon is.
I know the Trebon. Yeah, that's an East German communist car that Doug DeMuro actually reviewed all 29 horsepower of it. That was fun because normally Doug DeMuro, what's his name? Is it Doug DeMuro? I can't remember anyway. He's the guy who does the car reviews on YouTube, and he's like he's kind of like me. He's like he's young, but he's a total boomer, and he owns it. And he's usually like hello, and like behind me I have like a Bugatti Veyron, and yes, it costs $10 million. And then in the next episode he's like, hey, check this out, this is like a 1982 Trabant made in communist Germany.
No, the thing about the Trabant is that I could always tell my grandfather was coming because you could just see the cloud of smoke and the loud rickety noises. It's like, eventually, when the engine finally broke down, because the one thing Trebons are good at is that their engines don't break for like 50 years. The only thing he did is leave it in a goat farm, and within a few weeks, it was eaten by the goats because that's how shit the cars
go. Oh man, yeah, I've never seen one in real life before.
They are a death trap.
They're heavy, but they have hardly any horsepower, so they can't even really go up hills. Some of them, right?
The only car that's worse is the Lada, because there's a reason they make Ladas light. There's a reason they have to be easy to push.
You know what's funny? I think they're still in business. Like, if you go to Lada's website right now, you can still buy Ladas. Like, they still produce stuff. Like, I'm literally on their website right now. I'll actually screen share over there so we can check out their latest models in case any of you guys are. Well, actually, don't do that. I don't want you guys giving tax money to Putin. But like, you can, believe it or not, still buy a Lada. This is their official website, this is what 2021 Ladas look like. You got your largest universal Niva Legend, which actually kind of looks like a modern version of the Soviet stuff. That Vesta sedan, that kind of looks like it's going for like Volkswagen sort of style. And that's what they got there. You guys able to see this on the screen? Oh yeah, you guys can see that. So yeah, that's
like 3 cars in Hungary. You either have old Eastern European cars, you have broken down pickup trucks in the rural areas, and then like in the very wealthy areas, you have your BMWs and your rich people cars, Mercedes.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at like the backgrounds that they have going on in their lineup here, and you're like, okay, that kind of looks like it almost looked like a desert to me at first, but no, I can kind of see that being like somewhere around like the Volga region, southern Russia and whatnot. That can look Russian, but then you're like, okay, that maybe, but then you're like, there were some of these that I was looking at, and I'm like, are they intending for like people in the United States? Like, look at this, look at that. That looks like New York in the background there. That's not a skyline that exists in Russia.
Those cars
that doesn't exist in Russia. Like nowhere in Russia would you find that landscape. This exists in Russia, but that can exist in Russia. But like that there doesn't exist in Russia. Are they intending for these to like be sold in America? Like, can you even buy a Lada in America?
Here's how you can tell. You just have to look at the prices. If the prices are like literally above $5, then they're ripping you off, and so it's for Americans.
Oh man, yeah. I guess we should go back and check out the pricing. So I'm gonna go and check out what do we want to take a look at. Do we like cars? Do we want the largest? Let's take a look at
trucks.
Oh, they don't
Probably
have any
not.
truck offerings. No.
Oh God.
Let's go with Vesta Sport.
Yeah, Toyota's taken over down here. They opened up a Toyota factory in Texas, and so now everyone's like, "Oh, they're American made because they're assembled here or whatever."
Oh man, I'm just trying to see. Oh yeah, this one can do 193 kilometers an hour. We got 0 to 100 in 9.6. So that's like 0 to 60 in 9.6 seconds. That's it's a sedan. I'm just okay, but like it's a Lada and it's the 2021 model, and oh yeah, you got sport and comfort. I mean,
is that Bluetooth?
We can check out. Okay, so these are all the countries Lada in the world. You can buy them in Armenia, Bolivia, Jordan, Lebanon, Ukraine,
not America, Egypt,
Azerbaijan, Egypt, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Uzbekistan, Belarus, Georgia. Oh, Georgia, that's
Kyrgyzstan.
Wait, you can buy them in Georgia. When they say, actual Georgia, not just
no. Yeah, the nation of Georgia.
The actual nation that they invaded 13 years
yeah.
and haven't gotten the hell out of yet.
You buy their cars now.
Tunisia. And then, you're like, European Union. Oh, that's kind of a big one. You can buy these in the United Kingdom. Interesting.
Well, not anymore. You can't buy them in the UK anymore because
there must be sanctions,
also,
right?
I'm guessing the steering wheel is on the wrong side of the car, probably. It's over on the right side, I would assume.
Yeah, no, but especially never bring a trip on to like the roundabout at Paris. You know, that 6-lane roundabout at Arc de Triomphe.
Oh, yeah.
You want to know, that almost caused like a massive car accident because the smoke. Because the smoke just kind of created this big cloud, and suddenly we just have all I hear is a French guy yelling at us, and my grandfather yells back, and then just turns out it's like that thing was a death trap, and I'm somehow the fact I'm alive is
wow. You know what? They're not even offering prices. I'm looking at these. I'm like, wait, how much is it gonna? How much coin am I gonna have to drop on this to get one of these? They don't even.
I would think part of the reason you can't get them in the States and places because we have different cars. Like our steering wheel's on a totally different side of the vehicle.
That's true.
Over here.
Wait, don't they drive on? Wait, in Russia, don't they drive on the right? Like,
when they drive on the
no, I think it's just Canada and us and maybe Mexico. We're all the same. They're
Japan
they're
does
weird
it
over
weird.
on the continent over there.
No, but it's Russia. No. Russia drives on the right. Russia drives on the right. It's the UK and India and stuff that drive on the left in Japan.
Oh, it's just the UK?
Yeah, no. I got a map here. We'll go and screen share over. I got a map just to confirm it. I've seen dash cam footage from like all the memes of insane car accidents in Russia. We were like, how the hell did that happen? Like 8 people must have died because people get super drunk and they do stupid crap. And you're like, in all those videos, they're always on the right hand side of the road. Like you can literally go and watch a video. It's just a time lapse, and there's like 20 parts to it, and it's like 20 hours of footage sped up of a guy driving from Moscow to Vladivostok on the Trans-Siberian Highway. The full footage, you're like, oh shit, like that's a long highway. They're always on the right hand side. This is the map of countries in the world and their driving orientation.
So are there steering wheels on the left or right side too?
So
it's literally just the British places.
No, it's the British, except for Canada, though. Canada.
Well, no. Canada, I wouldn't. I mean, they're part of the Commonwealth, but
yeah, Commonwealth realms. So we've got Russia, the United States, China, Canada on the right. The only like big ones that are on the left are like India, Pakistan, UK, Japan, and Indonesia.
In Japan, Japan, Australia,
South Africa.
South Africa. And you've got that one nation in South America, but that's a British.
Well, that's French Guyana.
That's the place they speak English, right?
That's Suriname. That's Suriname and Guyana. Yeah, French Guyana drives on the right. But interesting though, Mozambique drives on the left, and they're Portuguese, so they were part of the Portuguese. But Portugal drives on the right. So like, what's up with that?
Like, because these nations surrounding them are right.
Yeah, or left. Yeah,
they've interconnected road systems probably.
Yeah, Thailand drives on the left.
Papua New Guinea too.
Myanmar drives on the right, though. They're like wedged in a bunch of countries that drive on the left. What country is that? Is that Jamaica under Cuba drives on the left?
Pretty sure that's Jamaica.
Yeah, Jamaica drives on the left. New Zealand drives on the left. Papua New Guinea. We got what other countries? Bangladesh, Nepal, Zambia, Botswana, Lesotho,
Kenya.
Swaziland. We got Uganda.
Well, do all the countries that drive on the left side, do they have the steering wheel on the left side?
Oh, that's
or on the right side, because we have our steering wheels on the left. We drive on the right.
Oh, this is an interesting debate.
No. This map, though, you get the sense here that like almost all the world is on the right-hand side, but you actually look at the population distribution there, only 70% or 69% drives on the right because so many people live in India and Pakistan that it skews it up. Like we're talking about almost 2 billion people.
Yeah, India and Japan and the UK are making up the bulk of that.
Well, and Pakistan, because Pakistan's like 200 million people. Yeah. I mean, more people live in Pakistan than Japan and the UK combined. So, and Indonesia is like 200 and something million people. So, because Japan's 120 million, UK is like what, like 70 million?
70 million.
So that's like 190 million people. And Pakistan, I'm pretty sure it's over. The Pakistan population, like it changes every year, big time. No, they got 216 million people. Like they're way bigger than
way more than I would have thought.
I mean,
Indonesia is probably coming up on 300 million. Like Indonesia population.
Indonesia is huge. It's a lot big. This map doesn't really do it justice. Honestly.
271 million people. So if we actually add up the population of these countries, we're talking like 1.3 billion in India. 200 million, so 1.5 billion together there. Then you throw in Bangladesh is another 120 million, or no, Bangladesh is almost 200 million. What's Bangladesh population? Their population's at 163 million. So we're at like say with all those countries there, including Thailand. Thailand's like 100 million people. We're talking say 2 billion plus Indonesia is another 270. So 2.3 billion. Then you throw in Japan, 2.4 billion. Billion. And then throw in the UK.
Oh, you're doing totals.
Yeah. 2.4. It's roughly about 2.6 billion people. Oh, plus those countries in Africa. Well, shit, that's a lot of people. So it's almost, it's basically like almost 3 billion people. Well, no, it can't be almost 3 billion people. It's like 2.7 billion.
Yeah, it's probably about 2 billion.
No, it's got to be more than 2 billion. It's got to be more than 2 billion because Indonesia, Pakistan, and India and Bangladesh.
There's like 8 billion people in the on Earth, and
so it's about 3 billion that drive on the left and about 5 billion that drive on the right. It's like 70-30, kind of. That doesn't really add up 100%, but I know it's closer to 3 billion that drive on the left, which is insane. I thought it was less, but
mind if I ask this one question real quick?
How
did we get here? Like, we were having that debate.
Oh, yeah, we're doing a debate right now.
Oh, right? Yeah, I forgot about that.
This is
like after hours. This is post show.
Yeah, no, you know what? This is post show. Well, no, I will do a post show and I'll just briefly talk about how I thought I did and stuff. But yeah, this will be flipped out as its own separate segment and stuff like that. This isn't really a debate, so for those keeping track of who's winning, we're not really.
Apparently, team left-hand side is winning.
Well, I'm surprised it's that high. I would have thought it was like 15% of the world or something, or 20% of the world. It's like it's 30%. So yeah. Sally says, "How did we come to this topic? Why is it part of the debate?" Sally said earlier too. I thought this was funny. Sally had a funny comment earlier on. She said, F my life that I have to be listening to Kev's debate on a Sunday night.
Yeah, it's Super Bowl Sunday, Sally. I mean, come on.
Oh man. Yeah.
Yeah, Super Bowl Sunday. I know football, so I definitely know what teams play. Totally just didn't watch the game for the pizza.
Oh man.
You should be deported.
I like this comment from Pess. He says, we were talking about cars earlier. He says, Lada lol. And then he says, Chinese cars are even worse. What's a good Chinese? Well, good. What's a good Chinese car brand to check out their cars?
Yeah, I couldn't even tell you. I know a good Chinese AK-47, but I don't know about their cars.
Oh man, yeah. I'm just looking at Automobile Blog right now. These Chinese car brands are racing to get to the U.S. first, but like all their stuff looks like ripoffs, basically. Okay, Vantas, you got Link & Co., you got GAC Motor. Okay, let's just go to GAC Motors website and see what kind of cars they've got. I wonder if you can even buy those in the U.S. or Canada right now. Let's see. We'll take a look at their offerings, their wares. Let's see what they got. Oh, interesting. Okay. Oh, wow. Actually, this site looks totally clunky. Lada had a way better looking site, believe it or not. Interesting. Let's screen share over. Let's see. You guys want to buy some Chinese automobiles?
I can't even drive, but yeah, let's go car shopping at 4 a.m.
No. I think their website looks clunky and just, I don't know. I thought Lada had a more inspired design. Well, these guys have electric vehicles, though. The Lada didn't. They were all petrol by the looks of it.
Oh, yes. Environmentally friendly shitty cars.
That's right. And like all these are basically ripped off of like South Korean engineering and stuff, of course. They're all like, or in Japan too. Okay. We got like, you got guys, they're like making a business transaction and stuff. And let's see, 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and Kuwait. And then you got like some cars and stuff down here. And that's, that right there, by the way, is Chicago in the background. That's literally Chicago in the background, except there's a mountain that's like, intersecting where like Trump Tower is supposed to be and stuff. Or like, okay.
I get it. Kuwait, they're close to going to buy this shit because they can afford it. every time they crash a car, they just buy a new one.
Well, yeah, but if I had the kind of money, like oil money from Kuwait and stuff, I'd probably be buying German cars over reverse engineered stuff from South Korea. But let's take a look at okay, so you can apply to be a dealer, you can book a test drive, got motor in your city. It's like, let's see, where are they even selling these? Well, I guess we should take a look at the models. Oh, okay. Well, that's not a bad layout. It looks pretty good there. Interesting. Research and development. Wait, that's a meme. What do you mean? Your research and development is you just look at what Honda's selling and then you're like, oh, let's just put our badge on that. What? Okay, research in this. Yeah, Research and Development Center. GAC Research and Development Center, established in 2006. GAC Group's Technology Management Department and R&D System Hub. Okay, but you guys just basically, like, everything that I've seen coming out of China with their cars, maybe GAC is different. It's just, oh, it's a Range Rover. Let's just take out the big engine in it, make a cheaper engine that's a third as powerful, and stick a different design on the badge and call it something else and sell it. They do it with Rolls-Royce. They do it with everything. They rip off everything. Their military, they did that. The Soviets ripped off America's technology, and then the Chinese ripped off the Soviets' rip-offs. So it's like second derivative innovation. So I find that funny. Like, I wonder what the research and development lab looks like. It's like, okay, let's check out what Toyota's selling today and try to copy
Research and Development Lab probably looks a lot more terrifying than you'd think.
Oh man, no, that's kind of a meme. Wow. Let's see. You want a good-looking car website? Look up Ling's Cars. Visit like that has to be bait or something. Like, there's no way I'm gonna do that on screen share. Like, I'm not sure. Maybe it is a good looking car website. We'll have to take a look. Ling's Cars. It doesn't sound like a car company, but oh yeah. No, okay. I'm glad I didn't screen share that. If I put that on the screen, somebody would have a seizure right now. Okay, yeah, that's a good like Rickroll type meme right there. It's
What was the website too?
It looks like it was designed in 1998 and has a lot of flashing lights and stuff on it and everything. Yeah, no, everybody's just giving me websites to look up. No, I'm not gonna do that. That's
just go to www.getrickroll.com. That's a good car site.
That's a good car site. I wonder what kind of cars they're selling. Oh man, yeah. So I think that's about everything for the debate.
The debate's over now?
Yeah, I think the debate's over. That was a long closing statements for sure.
One in the chat of Grayson won, 2 of Kevin won.
Oh man. Yeah, Kansik's saying he's epileptic and he's not having a seizure. Well, okay, but I mean it's pretty cringy, I'll say that. And everybody can feel free to look up that site in their own time. We're gonna wrap this up. I'm gonna do a brief post though, and and yeah, so that was an interesting debate. So, oh yeah, Henry won this debate. Okay, so
Lada won this debate. He got free sponsorship.
Yeah, no, Lada's like, oh yeah, let's check out their cars and stuff. I mean, the chances that we were gonna have this debate, like that anybody was gonna like put money on it and say, you know, what are the chances that they either talk about Lada or GAC tonight and look at their cars? Less than 5% probably would have been a fair estimate going into the debate. But yeah.
Anyway, closing statements.
This is the closest debate we've ever done on this channel. If you'd like to debate me and challenge me and everything, you can reach me over on Twitter. Just send me a DM. My DMs are open. That's how you get in touch, and that's how you get in line. And there is a line, and we've got, I believe, 2 or 3 debates coming up in this week. So stay tuned for that, and you can get it on the line for that, the waiting list. So I look forward to new challengers and everything. So and it's been fun. You know, we try to do more debates and everything over here because, you know, that's one of the stereotypes, like, oh, the neocon type people, they don't really do debates or whatever. It's like, no, I'll do debates. I'll do debates. So that's about everything I gotta say. You guys got any closing remarks?
I just got one thing to say. I really gotta get some real friends real soon because this is how I'm spending my Sunday nights, apparently.
Oh yeah, you know, you're on here debating and stuff, and it's like, yeah, no, I think that's kind of a good meme. I think there were a lot of good memes and everything tonight. So I'll be doing a short post show, so everybody can tune in for that. And Henry, you got anything to add?
Yeah. Buy Dogecoin, buy Hotcoin, and yeah, I'll end with that.
Yeah, hashtag to the moon. Hashtag hold the line. Hashtag hold the line. Hashtag diamond hands. Oh man, yeah. So have a good night, everybody. Stay based.